Well, hello, friends. Oh, it is so good to see you guys today. I am Melissa, and I am a grieving mother. And today I am talking about teen grief, teenagers in grief. We still have two teenagers at home, a son and a daughter. And, in our grief, for the last 4 years, it's actually now 4.5, I've always wondered in my mind about teenagers' grief and basically, how big is it? I think that is a question that a lot of us adults have with our teenagers in their grief. How big is it? And just bear with me a little bit today. This video might be a tad long. I'm going to try to talk a little fast just to try to get through a lot of this. But it's just basically kind of setting this up for my other videos that I'm going to go into a lot of detail about teenagers and grief. And even the kind of the definition of grief. And that's what I was going to center in on today. Yes, I got my notes, friends, for my grief brain. And I wanted to just kind of revisit with you guys about what it was like for us as teenagers. That's kind of where I had started at in my journal writing, and was just kind of discovering that basically, teen grief is huge. So the question is, how big is teen grief? It's huge. It's massive. It is bigger than you could imagine. It really is. Being a teenager is tough. I'm sure you can remember, because I sure do. Teenage years, we're young and invincible, and our bodies are changing, and our hormones were on a rampage. That's what it's like in our teenage years, right? Just like on a rampage. And we learned about relationships. We experimented with almost about everything. And we routinely made fools of ourselves in public. And of course, it's not until we're way past those teenage years, full-fledged adults, and having kids of our own, and then our kids grow up to be teenagers, that we're like, holy moly, is that what I looked like? Yeah, it is, basically, But being a teenager, it was fun, and it was stressful. Okay? And, if you guys remember as a teenager, we were on the search for identity. We wanted to belong. We were rebels who desperately wanted to run our own lives, weren't we? And you know what? Newsflash, that has never changed from one generation to another. Every teenager in their generation, it's fun, it's stressful, we're rebels, we made some good decisions, and we made some lousy ones. And so do our teenagers. Okay? And our relationships as teenagers were constantly evolving, especially with our parents, and, yeah, we were growing up. We long to be treated like adults, right? Without the weight of the responsibilities that the adulthood would naturally bring us, so we long for that, like, treat me like an adult. No, I don't want to work full time. We wanted part of the adultness, but without all that responsibility. And you know what? Teenagers are the same today, and even as teenagers, we care deeply about those that are around us. Life is emotional. We feel things deeply and impressively as teenagers. They're very meaningful and emotional. If you remember, guys, we used to maneuver through our days trying to meet the expectations that surrounded us, those of our parents, friends, teachers, coaches. If you can remember, guys, as teenagers, we were terrified of not measuring up. We didn't want to disappoint, right? Despite our acting brave, we were insecure inside and needy, weren't we? It was also confusing as a teenager. We filled our lives with noise, right? Trying to drown out all the unwanted voices for a while. Almost any distraction that promised any momentary escape from reality was welcomed, right? And many of us teens, we faced additional challenges, okay? And, some of us as teenagers, some of us, we lost friends, family members, homes, our innocence, safety, physical health, right? Many teens have to endure moves, separations, estrangements, divorces, poverty, domestic abuse, right? Domestic violence, bullying, natural disasters, and even death. Teenagers face all of those things too, right? Your home catches on fire, storms, hurricanes, earthquakes. Teenagers in your homes are affected by those too, right? We find ways to cope as teenagers, but not always well, do we? Right? Some of us, we piled up regrets that we wished we could just somehow erase. No teenager can do this alone, guys. They just can't. Our teens, they have to navigate a host of grief-related issues. And I know when we think of the word grief, we naturally think of death. And that's naturally just fine, that's a lot of what we use that word in our culture and society for. But grief is also not just death as well. And I know I spend a lot of time focusing on that because we lost Noah and Sophia, our two youngest children. So my teenagers are enduring life without their siblings in a traumatic death. But they're also still teenagers, which is why I spent these few moments revisiting what it was like for us as teenagers, because it's the same for them. Yeah, they stumble from time to time, but they're moving forward. It's this ongoing journey of healing, not a destination. It's an ongoing journey. And that's how we are trying to define healing in our household. It's not a destination that we are going to arrive at. And it's like, woo, rainbows and butterflies all the time. No, it's an ongoing journey. And like I said before, teenagers grieve the separation of many things, many things in their own lives. And then to the death of their siblings on top of all of those constant changes for these teenagers. Yeah, their grief is huge. Their grief is massive. And most of the time, they don't even understand what's going on with them, I've also discovered that healing is not becoming what I once was or make things like they were. That's impossible. Healing is about being wounded and broken and somehow making it count for good. Yeah. That's how we feel of healing, We feel the pain. Don't misunderstand that. We process the grief. We allow the process to mature us rather than disable us, I think is the goal. We learn, adjust, and grow together as a family. We collect more cracks and scars as we go, but somehow we're going to grow stronger as we tackle them together. When I look at my teenagers today, I am honestly stunned by the challenges that they face. I am. I look back and think, oh, my teenage years were a little rocky, a little rough. They're nothing compared to what my own teenagers have to face and challenge each day in grief. And for that, I am ever so extremely sorry for. Much so. The needs, they just seem greater, and the obstacles more intense, powerful, and large with teenagers. They do. With this reality also comes a great opportunity for us as their parents. So much of life is about grieving, adjusting, and overcoming. Have you noticed that, friends? That much of life is that. In an anxious and often very fearful world, teenagers have an unparalleled opportunity to rise to the occasion and transform tragedy into something positive and meaningful. But they can't do it alone. They can't. They have experienced a soul-cracking, heart-crushing loss. Yeah. And you know what? Another news flash, that teenagers don't need to experience death to feel a grief in their life. That is soul-cracking and heart-crushing. Yeah. Everything with teenagers is pretty intense. So the loss of friendships, the loss of their homes, separation from parents, those things are very heart-crushing for them. Not measuring up to expectations, whether spoken or unspoken. Teens value honesty and authenticity more than we realize. They really do, you guys. My teenagers respond to my authenticity more than anything else. Teens are the future, and their hearts are at stake. We spend a lot of time saying children are the future, children are the future, and then it's like we want to skip over that teenage life, right? The teenage years. But that is the future. Right on the brink is the teenage life. It goes right off into teenage life, right into adulthood, with no break in between. We can't afford to allow pain and loss to get the better of them. We just can't, parents. We just can't afford that. Each teen heart is a treasure beyond description. It's like we carry our teenage hearts with us into adulthood too. We can help. We must. Now, not everything I say, of course, is going to be applicable to every teenager. So that disclaimer definitely needs to be said. There is no magic pill, no cookie cutter works every time approach for every teen. Living with my teens, it's a great honor. It is. It's a great honor. They are special people about to go out and make their mark on the world. They're on the brink of walking out of our house and living their life separate from us. We can walk alongside these teenagers as they discover how to turn what looks terrible into something productive, positive, and good. Yes, you can make a difference. More than you realize. And how tempting the situation can be to be screaming that this is too big for you, you can't do this for you can't help your teenager. It's a lie. You can make a difference more than you realize. A lot of times, yes, we got to go get some help for us parents, go grab some other adults or whoever, that might know what they're doing or that they love our child very deeply, yes, the help. Because a lot of times I think even as parents, we cannot do it alone. And the Lord promises to lead those who have young. He promises to guide us in our parenting with not only our children, but our teenagers as well. And adult children too, newsflash. So how big is teen grief? It's pretty massive. It's huge, and it's bigger than you could imagine. Like I said, grief isn't only about death, Grief is far more expansive than this, and grief is a result of any kind of loss, whether real or perceived. Okay? So not all losses are deaths, and each loss is different in scope and the impact. Okay? So I've been watching my children as they grieve the deaths of their siblings, of Noah and Sophia. They also grieve the absence of their older brother, and they grieve many teenage losses that they experience. In the pandemic, the loss of school and social life was one of the biggest ones that they've had to endure these last couple years, as well as everyone else. The pandemic did a number on our teenagers, didn't it? Sometimes with teenagers, death isn't always the most powerful of all losses. It just isn't in teenagers sometimes. It's not always necessarily the case. Teens, they just tend to be adventurous, they're hormonal, a little edgy, full of deep anxiety or dread, and about the human condition or the state of the world in general. They're always concerned about those things. And on the flip side, they're also very fun-loving, risk-taking, and they are seemingly indestructible. Teenagers are, They live more in the moment than most of us. If you've noticed that about teenagers, they are experience-oriented people, right? We like to experience things as teenagers. We want to get our hands on them as teenagers, They naturally search for the newest, trendiest, and most exciting thing out there, don't they? They are constantly engaged in a moment-to-moment quest to discover who they are and where they're going to fit in this wacky-ass, ever-changing world. We've got to remember all these things, friends. We've got to remember these things about these teenagers. Most teens today are tech-driven, and they're used to having the world at their fingertips, right? So they're exposed daily to astronomical amounts of information, okay? And opportunity, and not all of it is good or beneficial. You and I both know that, right? They routinely sift through tons of messages, whether it's from Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, text messaging, YouTube, personal playlists, multiple other forms of social media. Daily, they sift through these messages. Their hearts are bombarded with messages from parents, family, friends, classmates, teachers, bosses, coaches, pastors, people they don't even know. Their hearts are bombarded with these messages. Every day they wander through this minefield of opportunity, where it can be difficult and challenging for them as teenagers to recognize what's safe and what's not. Our teens are up against a lot. They are, friends, and we can help. You can make a difference. Teenagers, they just live in an anxious and often troubled and fearful world, and they get hit, and some losses come early. By the time kids become teens, many have experienced multiple heavy losses. Yeah. So when they enter adulthood, most teens have racked up more wounds than we might at first imagine. So now we've got young adults around here with wounds. The wounds of a teenage heart can be deep, friends. Let's not forget them. You know, some teens, like my two, they've had to face traumas and crises, where others have had a smooth lives by comparison. You know, by the age of 18, many teens have been forced to navigate an incredible amount of loss, pain, and confusion. An incredible amounts of it, you know? So each loss has its own individual weight, and they all add up over time. They do, you know? And these painful experiences, mixed with positive ones, to influence and shape the young mind and heart. Yes. So sadly, the negative and traumatic, they just seem to carry more punch and power for the teenagers, don't they? And for us too, for humans, you know. As kids grow, they develop both simple and complex coping strategies to deal with these unpleasant events. Okay, so the coping patterns and the skills that kids develop and carry into their teen years might be half-ass effective for a while, right? But however, sooner or later, these got to make it through this somehow survival strategy will outlive their usefulness. Yeah, you can make a difference. Teen grief is a bigger issue than any of us can imagine. Okay, and I believe most of the issues that teens struggle with are driven by grief and related in some way to losses they've endured. Yeah, I do. An unresolved grief from past wounds is also the major root of our adult issues as well. Can I get an amen on that one? We all experience loss. Grief is universal. We began our grief journey soon after we were born. All right? And all of us experience some losses early and others along the way. To some degree, we've been where our teens are. And yet our experiences and theirs are completely unique. Like I said, yes, I was a teenager once, but I did not have to grow up in my formative teenage years in heavy grief with the loss of my siblings murdered by another sibling. And I greatly hate that my teenagers have to do this. Much so. I'm walking my path. The teenagers around me are walking theirs, yet our lives intersect and we do life together, okay? And so you can make a difference in their lives. Even if they're not your own teenage child, we encounter teenagers. Their lives intersect with ours at some point. And yes, you can make a difference. Grief is the natural response to any loss, okay? So, yeah, teen grief. How big is it? It's huge, it's massive, and it's bigger than you could imagine. Yeah. There are other losses. Maybe we got to think about, maybe as a question for you with your teenager, what other losses, other than death, might your teen have experienced in their lifetime? Remember, teen grief is a bigger issue than we can imagine. You can make a difference. I can make a difference. With God's help, with God's love, going forth first in our hearts, we can love these teenagers to God, straight into God's loving arms. All right, friends, well, let me wrap this up because this was a little bit of a long video today. Oh, God bless you for hanging with me here to the end. And yeah, you guys be well today. And don't forget about your teenagers. Remember, their hearts are sensitive and they care very deeply about the people in their lives. They just always put on such this big old brave face most of the time. And they don't come running into our arms and hugging on us and laying all up on us and all the things that they did when they were smaller. But they still care and they still love. They're just so wrapped up in their moment to moment living. But remember, you can make a difference. Well, God bless you today, friends, and be well. And I will see you on my next video.